Here in Wiltshire we are very much in combined territory indeed. The Wiltshire's split between two fiefdoms. In the northern part of Wiltshire is the fiefdom of the Marquis of Lansdowne, who is the petty Fitzmaurice family, who have run British military intelligence for 300 years. And in the south of Wiltshire is the dominion of the Marquis of Salisbury, who is Robert Gascoigne's Cecil, who their house, their main building, Hatfield House, is just across the border in Hampshire, but they still run that part of Hampshire and South Wiltshire. That is the fiefdom of the Cecil family. Indeed, the Cecil family are linked to the Pallavicinis. They are outwardly Protestant, but of course are Jesuit linked, and as a family they are handled by the Pallavicinis. The Pallavicinis being effectively the part of the Grey Jesuit ultra-aristocratic families who are linked in with the whole Jesuitical structure and thus are linked to the Combine. And indeed the Pallavicini-Cecil marriage was brought forth in 1545, just 5 years after the Jesuits had been sworn in by papal bull. And indeed the fiefdom in North Wiltshire of Petty Fitzmaurice, is that dynasty has always been a Jesuit dynasty. Indeed, the whole French Revolution was dictated from Bowood House here in Wiltshire, in tandem with the Bavarian Illuminati in Germany and France. And as I've stated, Bowood House is now hosts the war rooms of MI5 and MI6. Thus Wiltshire is in a very important position when it comes to the Combine. And indeed, of course, we have the Porton Down, where mutants are created and drugs are taken. When the drugs are taken by the police, they are usually sent to Porton Down, sprayed with new synthetic substances, and then tested in each town and village in Wiltshire. And there are watchers, MI5 watchers, who watch the junkies in small towns to see how they react to the drugs that have been put back into society by Porton Down. It's all a test. It's all a continuation of Operation Paperclip and MK Ultra. It's effectively drugging in the sense as in a Soviet asylum. You are watched and tested the drugs, the guinea pigs. We're effective. This is happening on a societal scale here in Wiltshire. As I said, Wiltshire is the nerve centre for the whole Combine and Jesuit Order and MI5, MI6, and of course Porton Down. Porton Down being the biggest biological chemical weapons factory in the NATO arsenal, and it's all located here in Wiltshire. It's located in the Marquis of Salisbury's fief, Porton Down. There's no surprise that all of the most important things seem to be in one part of the country, because it's these two families, the Petty Fitzmaurice and the Cecil family, who are the most powerful dynasties in Britain, aside from the Percys, who are running Agenda 21, the depopulationist agenda, and have control over the New Age movement, which was created anyway by a Jesuit, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, S.J. And then there are the Welds. The Welds gave Stonyhurst College to the Jesuits in the 1790s, and indeed Stonyhurst College remains a Jesuit educational institution. It's somewhere in the northeast, I believe. But there are tunnels leading from Bowood House through to Porton Down and then onward to Hatfield House. It's all linked up. Those were old Catholic monk tunnels and priest holes, which have now been utilized by the Jesuits during their colonization of Britain during the period of 1773 to 1815. It was 1815 and the Jesuits, Rothschild allies, brought up the whole economic structure of Britain, and ever since then Britain has been firmly in the hands of the Jesuit order. And it also links back to the concessions of King John, which occurred during 1213 and 1215. And effectively, ever since 1213 and 1215, Britain has been a papal vassal. It's been the concessions of King John initially King John refused the Pope Innocent III's choice of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and thus Pope Innocent III excommunicated the British nation. And to revert this tide, King John initially had to give up some concessions, and he gave the English population and its holdings to the Pope. And then in 1215, when King John signed the Magna Carta, the Pope dismissed it and made it null and void, and King John was forced to concede the Crown Corporation and the British monarchy to the Pope. So Britain is technically, and America, as it's an extension of the British Virginia Company, they are vassals, they are the fiefdoms owned by the papacy. Thus, and the papacy is now in the hands of the Jesuits and has been since 1814. Thus, Britain and America are little more than Jesuit fiefdoms. Just as these small fiefdoms here in Wiltshire are entirely Jesuitical, with the Petty Fitzmaurice Jesuit dynasty, who have control over MI5 and MI6. The Petty Fitzmaurice, Lord Lansdowne, he controls MI5 and MI6 in the same way that Georgetown University controls the CIA. It's a Jesuitical combine dynasty and entity, for instance, Lord Lansdowne or Georgetown University, and they control the intelligence agencies that aren't Jesuit. The Jesuit order is, of course, the major intelligence agency, but they control the activities of the CIA and MI6, especially with foreign geopolitics, and within domestic politics, the FBI and MI5 are controlled directly by Georgetown University or Lord Lansdowne. Thus, I was quite surprised that, while I've been researching the Jesuits and the Illuminati, I didn't realize how close to home the nerve centers, the strategic nerve centers of the Jesuit order and such were. So nearby, and indeed the town I was living in is a testing ground for MI5, MI6 spies. You sometimes see them dressed up as junkies, and they get the look right, but their body language is awful, so you can immediately see through them. And then there are the watchers, because of what happens with the drugs that are confiscated by the police being sent through port and down, and then sprayed with new synthetic substances, and then tested in each town in Wiltshire. You begin to notice the watchers, because the watchers are there to watch the drug addicts to see how they react to the drugs that are being put into circulation by the police in Port and Down working together. It's a government conspiracy, an MI6 conspiracy, because the MI6 wish to use drugs for warfare in other nations, and thus they need to carry out this experiment in a domestic environment before they use it in foreign conflicts. If you start going around trying to tell people that, people think you're loopy. But we're approaching a time of drug epidemics on quite a heavy scale, especially what with the war in Syria. They keep adding more sides to it. It's because Britain and Russia, they're all actually, Assad, the rebels, they're all actually just, a lot of the organizations are fake, keep being added, and they're all effectively, it's just chaos being created so that the MDMA ecstasy trade can continue, because the ecstasy pills we see in Britain are synthesized in Israel, and the route is through the M5 drug route, it's called, and it's mainly Iraqi Catholic gangs and Syrian Catholic gangs that take the drugs up through Syria, and the more chaos in Syria, the more MDMA gets through, and the epidemic is going to consist of very, very bad quality ecstasy, and we are probably going to see a lot of deaths. But the more carnage in the Middle East, the more the drugs trade can continue. And the M5 drug route is overseen by the Massimo and Medici ultra-aristocratic families, and all the Iraqi Catholic gangs and Syrian Catholic gangs that are moving through Syria. They sometimes have to pay tithes and tributes to warlords to make it through their territory, but the coffers of the Medicis and the Massimos are more than enough to pay off these groups, these rebel groups or Syrian government troops or whoever, and this war is just being continued to keep up this massive ecstasy explosion, which is going to rock Britain in a crazy way, and Russia involved also because the Russian regime is criminal and it has no problem in drugging its own people because it's mafiosa, and so half of the ecstasy will head through the Caucasian knot and go up into Russia. So we'll see all these Britain and Russian societies being destroyed by this bad ecstasy, which is being synthesized in Israel and then goes up through Syria. And it's no surprise that it's Iraqi Catholic and Syrian Catholic gangs, because they'll be directly linked to the Massimos and the Medicis, who are Catholic dynasties. And of course there is Jesuit Father Dalloglio, who is part of the carnage. He's the Jesuit handler of the Syrian situation, and he will oversee the drugs trade itself. Father Dalloglio, SJ, rather important character, but nobody's really heard of him. Either way, he's another character who is part of the Jesuitical plan to bring the world to its knees, and indeed the approach of a Sovietization of our society, but at the same time there is a Scannadarkly-esque move going onto it. So while 60% of the population of Britain will live in misery and be slaves of a communist regime, the remainder will be on heavy drugs, and they will be slaves in a different way. They will be enslaved by the drugs, and they will no longer want to rise up against the government. It's a way to suppress any kind of dissent, is just to drug the population to the nines and hope that the subversives pretty much are killed off in a way. So we're about to see a lot of epidemics of very strong drugs and very strong synthetic drugs that have not been seen in the UK yet, but they will be seen soon enough. And what with constant surveillance, we are entering into a Scannadarkly on a big scale. And this is coinciding with the growth of the police state and the Sovietization of the West. Indeed, it's no surprise that there is the common monument. It's actually an obelisk. It's Baal shaft and Cleopatra's needle. It's a Masonic symbol that the Lansdowne family obviously built. The Marquis of Lansdowne's family were obviously built to mark that this is Freemason territory. And of course, being a Jesuit dynasty, there is the links between the Jesuits and Freemasonry. And it's obviously a show of power. This is Jesuit land. This is a Jesuit area. And the way it's placed directly above the town, it's almost like this is the town. This is where it all goes on. So yes, the dynasties you need to watch out for in Britain are the Percys with their depopulationist agenda. They are linked to the New Age movement. They are controlling the New Age movement and using the New Age movement as mouthpieces for Malthusian agenda. Even though the New Age people think they're spreading peace and love, they're actually spreading depopulationist and Malthusian propaganda. And then we have the Welds, and then the Petty Fitzmaurice, the Marquis of Lansdowne, who control MI6 and MI5, but they are a Jesuit dynasty, and thus this shows that the MI5 and MI6 are under direct control of the Marquis of Lansdowne, or therefore the Jesuits, just as the Jesuits resident at Georgetown University have complete control over the CIA and the FBI. And its intelligence networks are working together. The FSB in Russia is controlled also by the Jesuit order. The Jesuit order is the most complex and unbreakable intelligence network on Earth. Indeed, even, and their genius is, with their suppression, Lorenzo Ricci engineered their suppression. They managed to amass more power during their suppression in 40 years than they had done for the 250 years since their formation. It was absolutely incredible. They first started the French Revolution and then brought forth Napoleon, had Napoleon do all their dirty work, and by 1814 they were reinstated, and they'd actually taken control of the papacy because Napoleon had cut off the church's tithes and pretty much weakened the Catholic Church so much that the Jesuits were able to take over the entire papacy and the Curia. And the Curia no longer had Neoplatonic elements or liberal elements that would work against the Jesuits. Since then it's been complete Jesuit dominion in the papacy. And then we see a social experiment such as the Soviet Union, the dialectic caused by the Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, then the dialectic caused by Edmund Walsh S.J. and the Georgetown University of the creation of the synthetic Cold War. And of course now we're seeing the implementation of a synthetic Dark Age with the Sovietization of Britain and the activities of the Jesuitical Psychiatric Combine and the suppression of dissent and the abuse of psychiatry and the coming police state. It's creeping fascism, but what is the difference between communism and fascism? Barely anything. Communism is just another form of fascism, or fascism is just another form of communism, whatever way you want to look at it, but both the ideologies are Jesuitical in root, a mixture of Jesuit Paraguayan reductions and Weishauptian technocratic communistic ideals. And what we see now is more and more coercion of the mind and the all-out war against intellectual freedom and a synthetic new Dark Age.